Glossary of poetic terms. First, we have allegory. It is a symbolic narrative in which the surface details imply a secondary meaning. Allegory often takes the form of a story in which the characters represent moral qualities. Sometimes they called it an extended metaphor. It is a narrative story that is metaphoric or symbolic, like the novel of Animal Farm. On the surface, it talks about the community of animals, and on the allegorical level, and it talks about the Russian history and politics. So, allegory is the story that has a secondary meaning. Second, alliteration. It is the repetition of consonants sounds, especially at the beginning of words. For example, fetched fresh, as I suppose, off some sweet wood. When we talk about the sound devices, we talk mainly about alliteration, consonance, and assonance. What is important is to know what are you repeating, what is the sound repeated, and where is the repetition located. When you talk about alliteration, the repetition is of the consonant sounds, not letters, and it happens at the beginning. There are other rules. For example, alliteration happens only at the words that are stressed. If the word is not stressed at the beginning, we do not consider it as alliteration. Allusion. It is a figure of speech, in which one refers covertly or indirectly to an object or circumstances from an external context. It is left to the audience to make the connection, where the connection is directly and explicitly stated, as opposed to indirectly implied, by the author. An allusion is instead usually termed a reference. In the arts, a literary allusion puts the alluded text in a new context under which it assumes new meanings and denotations. Allusion is a reference, when the poet refers to a historical or religious figure, event or circumstances in a poem, and the reader knows something about this event, because if you know something about this event, you understand the text more. Why does the poet do that? He does that to enrich the text. For example, if there is reference to something in mythology, just mentioning the name, when you read you understand other meaning and you figure out other meanings of the line. This depends on your own point of view, your own experience and your own knowledge. The verb of the word allusion is allude. It is different from the word illusion, by the way. Now we have anapist. It is two unaccented syllables followed by an accented one, as in comprehend or intervene. When we talk about foot and meter, we have what we call anapist. Two unstressed syllables followed by stress syllable. Antagonist. It is a character or force against which another character struggles. It is the opposite of protagonist. Assonance. It is the repetition of similar vowel sound in a sentence or a line of poetry or prose, as in I rose and told him of my woe. Assonance is the repetition of the vowels within the word. It does not happen in the beginning of the word. For example, rose and told, rain and brain. When we talk about consonance and assonance, there is something important, that these words should be successive. Apostrophe. A figure of speech in which the poet addresses an absent or dead person, an abstract quality. Poets may apostrophize a beloved, the muse, God, love, time, or any other entity that cannot respond in reality. The word "o" is often used to signal such an invocation. Apostrophe is when the poet addresses an absent person, an abstract idea, a thing or an object. Aubade. It is a French word. It is a love lyric in which the speaker complains about the arrival of the dawn, when he must part from his lover. Ballad. It is a narrative poem written in 4-line stanzas, characterized by swift action and narrated in a direct style. Ballad is a poem that consists of a stanza, and the stanza is a quatrain, 4 lines. A narrative poem means that it tells a story. There is an action because there is a story, but this action is swift, light, and it is narrated in direct style. Blank verse. It is a line of poetry or prose in unrhymed iambic pentameter. We have what we call blank verse and free verse. The blank verse in unrhymed, but it has a meter. It is unrhymed, which means the ending words do not have to rhyme together. The meter is most of the time iambic pentameter. Caesura. It is a strong pause within a line of verse. The following stanza from Hardy's The Man He Killed contains caesuras in the middle 2 lines. He thought he'd list, perhaps, offhand like, just as I was out of work had sold his traps. No other reasons why. You can see that the poet here pauses a lot. This could be an indication of his reluctance. He is not sure, he is not certain. Maybe the poet is scared, worried or reluctant. Sometimes he is not good person. Connotation, the associations called up by a word that goes beyond its dictionary meaning. Poets, especially, tend to use words rich in connotation. Connotation is the meaning of the word that surpasses the dictionary meaning. For example, if we say winter in a poem, usually it means death. This is the connotation of the word winter. We have another example from Kubla Khan poem. When we say cave, it means something that is cold, dark and mysterious, etc. If we say Wall Street, it connotes with capitals, tower and wealth. So, connotation is the word that is associated with other meanings. Consonance. It is a poetic device that refers to repetitive sounds produced by consonants within a sentence or phrase. This repetition often takes place in quick succession, such as in pitter, patter. There are similarities between alliteration and consonance. Consonance is the repetition of consonant sounds. Alliteration is in the stressed syllables and in the beginning, but the consonance is not limited to the beginning. There is another rule which is the succession, which means that the words are nearby, they are close to each other. We have a silly random example: she ate 7 sandwiches on a sunny Sunday. Couplet. It is a pair of rhymed lines that may or may not constitute a separate stanza in a poem. Shakespeare's sonnets end in rhymed couplets, as in "For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings." Dactyl. It is a stressed syllable followed by 2 unstressed ones, as in flutering or blueberry. When we talk about poetry, this is not kind of frequent. Denotation. It is the opposite of connotation. It is the dictionary meaning of the word. Writers typically play off a word's denotative meaning against its connotations, or suggested and implied associational implications. It is used in contrast with connotation just to add sort of balance to the poem. Dialogue. It is the conversation of characters in a literary work. In fiction, dialogue is typically enclosed within quotation marks. In plays, characters' speech is preceded by their names. Usually dialogues are marked by quotation marks. Dramatic monologue, a poem in which an imagined speaker addresses a silent listener, usually not the reader. The dramatic monologue has a speaker and an auditor but no dialogue. It is a fragment. It is also occasioned by a critical juncture or emotional crisis in the life of the speaker. Usually we have a speaker, a silent listener, dramatic context which they call here as occasioned by a critical juncture or emotional crises. And we say that the speakers reveal things about themselves. Elision. It is the omission of an unstressed vowel or syllable to preserve the meter of a line of poetry. Alexander Pope uses elision in Sound and Sense, Flies or th unbending corn. Enjambment. A run-on line of poetry in which logical and grammatical sense carries over from one line into the next. An enjambed line differs from an end-stopped line in which the grammatical and logical sense is completed within the line. In the opening lines of Robert Browning's My Last Duchess, for example, the first line is end-stopped and the second enjambed, "That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder, now." Enjambment is when the line is not complete grammatically and logically. It is when the poet, for the sake of the meter or for the sake of the rhyme scheme, and then he continues the idea in the next lines. You cannot understand the full idea without finishing 2 or 3 lines. Epic. It is a long narrative poem that records the adventures of a hero. Epics typically chronicle the origin of a civilization and embody its central values. Examples from Western literature include Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, Virgil's Aeneid, and Milton's Paradise Lost. So, the epic is a very long poem and it is an adventure of a hero. It is not personal. Figurative language. It is a form of language use in which writers and speaker convey something other than the literary meaning of their words. Examples include hyperbole or exaggeration, litotes or understatement, simile and metaphor, which employ comparison, and synecdoche and metonymy, in which a part of a thing stands for the whole. Figurative language is the opposite of literal language. Foot, a metrical unit composed of stressed and unstressed syllables. For example, an iamb or iambic foot is represented by comma, that is, an unaccented syllable followed by an accented one. It is the metrical system or unit composed of stressed and unstressed syllables. We have also spondee. It is two stressed syllables. There is another type of metric foot which is troch. It is the opposite of an iambic. It is stressed syllable followed by an unstressed one. For example, tiger tiger, burning bright. The last foot should be unstressed, but the poet deletes it for the sake of the rhyme. And we usually say the poet does that under the poetic license. This line is called catalectic. Iambic, unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one. We are talking about meters. We are talking about something that is measured. Something you can measure. We measure two things, we see the foot and that is its type, and then we count how many foot do we have. If they are 3 syllables, we call it trimeter. If they are 4 feet, we call it tetrameter. If we have 5 feet, we call it pentameter. If they are 6 feet, we call it hexameter. Trimeter, 3 feet. Tetrameter, 4 feet. Pentameter, 5 feet. Hexameter, 6 feet. Free verse, it is poetry without a regular pattern of meter or rhyme. The verse is free in not being bound by earlier poetic conventions requiring poems to adhere to an explicit and identifiable meter and rhyme scheme in a form such as the sonnet or ballad. Free verse is opposite to blank verse. It is more free, without rhyme and without meter, like the poems of Langston Hughes. Hyperbole. It is a figure of speech involving exaggeration. John Donne uses hyperbole in his poem, Song, Go and Catch a Falling Star. It is exaggeration. I am, it is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one, as in today. Image. It is a concrete representation of a sense impression, a feeling, or an idea. Very often the word image suggests a mental picture, something seen in the mind's eye. But there are 7 other kinds of imagery. 1. Visual imagery, that which represents a concrete image that can be seen. 2. Auditory imagery, that which represents a sound. 3. Olfactory imagery, that which represents a smell. 4. Gustatory imagery, that which represents a taste. 5. Tactile imagery, that which represents a touch, such as hardness, softness, wetness, or heat and cold. 6. Organic imagery, that which represents an internal sensation, such as hunger, thirst, fatigue, or nausea. 7. Kinesthetic imagery, that which represents a movement or tension in the muscles or joints. Irony, a contrast or discrepancy between what is said and what is meant, or between what happens and what is expected to happen in life and in literature. In verbal irony, characters say the opposite of what they mean. In irony of circumstance or situation, the opposite of what is expected occurs. In dramatic irony, a character speaks in ignorance of a situation or event known to the audience or to the other characters. Literal language. It is the opposite of figurative language. A form of language in which writers and speakers mean exactly what their words denote. Lyric poem. A type of poem characterized by brevity, compression, and the expression of feeling. Metaphor, a comparison between essentially unlike things without an explicitly comparative word such as like or as. An example is my love is a red, red rose. We have metaphor in Sailing to Byzantium poem when he compares the body or the skin to a tattered coat upon a stick. Meter, it is the measured pattern of rhythmic accents in poems. Metonymy, It is a figure of speech in which a closely related term is substituted for an object or idea. For example, we have always remained loyal to the crown. Here the crown means the king. So, metonymy is a word replaced by something that signifies it. Narrative poem, it is a poem that tells a story. Octave, it is an 8-line unit, which may constitute a stanza, or a section of a poem, as in the octave of a sonnet. Ode, it is a long, stately poem in stanzas of varied length, meter, and form. Onomatopoeia, it is the use of words to imitate the sounds they describe. Words such as buzz and crack are onomatopoetic. So, it is the imitation of the sounds like buzz and crack. Open form, it is a type of structure or form in poetry characterized by freedom from regularity and consistency in such elements as rhyme, line length, metrical pattern, and overall poetic structure. It is the opposite of fixed form. The freedom is in the form. The poet does not follow conditions. Overstatement, it is an act of stating something more than it actually is in order to make the point more serious or important or beautiful. In literature, writers use it as a literary technique for the sake of humor, and for laying emphasis on a certain point. Overstatement is like exaggeration, but it is to draw your attention. Paradox, it is a statement or proposition that seems self-contradictory or absurd but in reality expresses a possible truth. For example, I know one thing, that I know nothing. We have another random silly everyday example. Nobody is going to restaurant because the restaurant is too busy, crowded. Parody, a humorous, mocking imitation of a literary work, sometimes sarcastic, but often playful and even respectful in its playful imitation. You see the word parody in Twitter accounts. It is a parody account. What does this mean? It is mocking, make fun, satirize. So, parody is an imitation in a humorous way. It is when the poet is mocking something, but showing the serious side, not showing that it is ridiculous or stupid. It is making fun in a certain way. The book Gulliver's Travels is a travel book. The writer is saying that he traveled around the world. He went to a place with small people and he went to a place of strange creatures. He traveled to a mysterious places. In reality he is mocking, he is making fun of travel books. I traveled there and I saw these great adventures. I saw these great places. So, he is making fun, but in exotic way. He is making fun of travel book. Pastoral poems are creative works that idealize rural life and landscapes. Personification, the endowment of inanimate objects or abstract concepts with animate or living qualities. Point of view, the angle of vision from which a story is narrated. A work's point of view can be first person, in which the narrator is a character or an observer, respectively; objective, in which the narrator knows or appears to know no more than the reader; omniscient, in which the narrator knows everything about the characters; and limited; omniscient, which allows the narrator to know some things about the characters but not everything. Quatrain, it is a 4-line stanza in a poem, the first 4 lines and the second 4 lines in a Petrarchan sonnet. A Shakespearean sonnet contains 3 quatrains followed by a couplet. Rhyme, the matching of final vowel or consonant sounds in 2 or more words. The following stanza of Richard Cory employs alternate rhyme, with the 3rd line rhyming with the first and the 4th with the second. Whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown, clean-favored and imperially slim. It is the identical sound in the end of the lines. The ending sound should be identical, so we call it the end rhyme. There are many kinds of rhyme. There is perfect rhyme, half rhyme, and I rhyme. The I rhyme, the words look like rhyme together, but when you read, the sound is not the same. And there is what we call the internal rhyme. We have an example of the internal rhyme. I went to town to buy a gown. Town, gown. Satire. It is a literary work that criticizes human misconduct and ridicules vices, stupidities, and follies. Scansion. It is the act of determining and, usually, graphically representing the metrical character of a line of verse. In classical poetry, these patterns are based on the different lengths of each syllable, and in English poetry, they are based on the different levels of stress placed on each syllable. In both cases, the meter often has a regular foot. Scansion is the practice that we are doing in lines. It is when you read a poetic line and you try to measure the meter, sestet. It is a 6-line unit of verse constituting a stanza or section of a poem, the last 6 lines of an Italian sonnet. Sestina. It is a poem consisting of 6 sestets and 1 tercet called envoy, or tornado. The sestina follows a strict pattern of the repetition of the initial 6 end words of the first stanza through the remaining 5 6-line stanzas, culminating in a 3-line envoy. The lines may be of any length, though in its initial incarnation, the sestina followed a syllabic restriction. The form is as follows, where each numeral indicates the stanza position and the letters represent end words: 1. A B C D E F. 2. F A E B D C. 3. C F D A B E. 4. E C B F A D. 5. D E A C F B. 6. B D F E C A. 7. Envoy, ECA or ACE. The envoy, sometimes known as the tornado, must also include the remaining 3 end words, BDF, in the course of the 3 lines so that all 6 recurring words appear in the final 3 lines. In place of a rhyme scheme, the sestina relies on end word repetition to effect a sort of rhyme. You can see the rhyme scheme. The stanza consists of 6 lines. The poet usually chooses this difficult forms in order to show his ability and to challenge himself. Setting. It is the time and place of a literary work that establish its context. Simile. It is a figure of speech involving a comparison between unlike things using like, as, or as though. An example: my love is like a red rose. Sonnet. A 14-line poem in iambic pentameter. The Shakespearean or English sonnet is arranged as 3 quatrains and a final couplet, rhyming Aubade C D C D F F G G. The Petrarchan or Italian sonnet divides into 2 parts, an 8-line octave and a 6-line sestet, rhyming Abu Abu Dactyl Abu Abu C D C D C D. When we talk about sonnet, we talk about 1 Italian, Petrarchan, sonnet, 2 the English, Shakespearean, sonnet, 3 Spenserian sonnet. When we talk about sonnet, we talk about 1 in the Italian sonnet. It is 14 lines. These 14 lines are divided into 2 sections, an 8-line stanza, octave, and a 6-line stanza, sestet. Then there is a change, a turn, a shift. This is what we call volta. The octave is called the burden because it raises the question or the problem. It introduces the argument. And then we have the sestet. Volta signifies or marks a change in the topic or subject matter. The rhyme of the octave is ABBA ABBA. To the Shakespearean sonnet, Shakespeare put his Shakespearean sonnet and he changed that rhyme scheme. 3 Spenserian sonnet. It is another variation Shakespearean sonnet, but for Shakespearean sonnet the rhyme scheme is not linked, so he improved the rhyme scheme. There are 14 lines in a Shakespearean sonnet. The first 12 lines are divided into 3 quatrains with 4 lines each. The last 2 lines are called the couplet, who brought the Petrarchan sonnet to the English literature. Originally it is an Italian form written by a poet called Petrarch. Sir Thomas White brought it to the English literature. Sonnet sequence. It is not defined. Stanza, a division or unit of a poem that is repeated in the same form either with similar or identical patterns or rhyme and meter, or with variations from one stanza to another. Symbol, an object or action in a literary work that means more than itself, that stands for something beyond itself. The glass unicorn in the Glass Menagerie, the rocking horse in the Rocking Horse Winner, the road in Frost's The Road Not Taken, all are symbols in this sense. Synecdoche. It is a figure of speech in which a part is substituted for the whole. An example: lend me a hand. Tercet. It is a three-line stanza, the three-line stanzas or sections that together constitute the sestet of a Petrarchan or Italian sonnet. Theme. It is the idea of a literary work abstracted from its details of language, character, and action, and cast in the form of a generalization. Tone. It is the implied attitude of a writer toward the subject and characters of a work. Understatement. A figure of speech in which a writer or speaker says less than what he or she means, the opposite of exaggeration. The last line of Frost's Birches illustrates this literary device. One could do worse than be a swinger of birches. It is the opposite of exaggeration and overstatement. It is when the matter is serious and the poet underestimating it. For example, in J.D. Salinger's book, The Catcher in the Rye, he says that, "I have to have this operation. It isn't very serious. I have this tiny little tumor on the brain." He is talking about an operation or a surgery that he has to have. He says, "I have to have this very small, tiny, not serious kind of operation. It is just a tumor in the brain." It is supposed to be something serious, but he is underestimating it. Please, do not forget to click notification bell, like, share, comment and subscribe my channel.